Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, by Ruth Watson from Keep Scotland the Brand. Ruth, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, thanks. Thanks for having me along.
Excellent. And on the other side of me, we have a man who has been in the news this week, Drew Hendry, the MP for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey. Drew, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Well, we are going to be talking to Ruth and Drew tonight about the internal market bill and, of course, why Drew was in the news this week. But we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,289,203 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,179,163 were confirmed negative, 110,040 were positive. There were 744 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, there were 36 new reported deaths. Of course, this will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will show symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get tested. As always, we do urge you, if you are showing symptoms of a new, dry, persistent cough, a fever, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then please do book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,032 people were in hospital last night, 50 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 4,239. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures published today show that 66,541 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 489 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. In news that broke just before we came on air, Dundee MSP Joe Fitzpatrick has resigned as Minister for Public Health after coming under intense scrutiny over the announcement earlier this week of record high drug deaths in Scotland. Labour and the Liberal Democrats had proposed a vote of no confidence in the minister, but Fitzpatrick chose to step down rather than face parliamentary censure. Angela Constance MSP has been announced as his replacement. The European Union said today that there were just hours left to strike a Brexit trade deal, while the UK called on the bloc to see sense as the two sides race to prevent a damaging no-deal crisis at the end of this month. Both sides are demanding that the other compromise amid a flurry of often conflicting messages that a deal is possible, a deal is in serious trouble, or that a deal is imminent. Several hours after EU Chief Negotiator Michel Barnier told London that there were just hours left to navigate a narrow path towards a deal, Johnson said the British door was open, but that the EU should see sense and compromise. It's the moment of truth, Barnier told the European Parliament in Brussels. There is a chance of getting agreement, but the path to such an agreement is very narrow. Johnson said the UK would keep talking, but that he would not compromise on taking back control of its laws and its fishing waters, which he says is the fundamental point of leaving the EU. 25 new schools and campuses are to be constructed or refurbished to provide modern, state-of-the-art learning facilities for approximately 21,000 children and young people across Scotland. Education Secretary John Swinney revealed that Scottish Government funding, alongside local authority contributions to Phase 2 of the Learning Estate Investment Programme, will enable almost £800 million of investment across 18 local authorities. The programme will deliver digitally enabled low-carbon schools and campuses, ensuring they are inclusive and welcoming places that meet the needs of the whole community. Mr Swinney said the investment will boost the construction industry and help economic stimulus with creation of jobs. Citizens of the European Union who live in Scotland are being urged to apply to the EU settlement scheme. In an open letter and a video message, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said it is vital that every EU citizen who wishes to stay in Scotland completes an application by the 30th of June next year. While it is the Scottish Government's view that EU citizens should not need to apply to protect the rights they already have to live, work and study here, the UK Government has made it a requirement. The SNP has also today ramped up its calls for the UK Government to scrap the no recourse to public funds policy, which has a disproportionate impact on migrants and pushes many into destitution. The policy, which the SNP has repeatedly urged the UK government to ditch, excludes people from accessing financial support, including universal credit and housing assistance. The SNP has echoed the warnings of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that people who cannot access support are being disproportionately impacted due to the double hit of financial difficulties and the impact of the coronavirus crisis, with migrants often amongst the worst hit. Scotland generated enough electricity from renewable sources last year to meet the equivalent of 90.1% of the country's total electricity consumption. In 2019, the electricity generated from renewable sources was enough to charge almost 6.7 billion mobile phones for a year, and the amount of renewable heat generated was equivalent to the gas use of every building in Glasgow. Overall, the amount of electricity, transport and heat energy produced in Scotland from renewable sources increased between 2017 and 2018 to 21.1%. Lothian MSP Andy Whiteman has resigned from the Scottish Green Party, following disagreements over the party's approach to transgender rights. Whiteman voted with his Green colleagues against the Lamont Amendment in last week's debate on the Forensic Medical Services Bill, but in a statement released today said he had wanted to vote for the amendment. He says he decided not to when the party said he could face disciplinary action leading to possible suspension, deselection or expulsion. Whiteman went on to say that he was saddened by the intolerance of some party members to an open and mature dialogue. A spokesperson for the party said, "The Scottish Greens are focused on building a greener and fairer Scotland that tackles the climate emergency, so Andy Whiteman's decision not to be part of our movement anymore is a matter of deep disappointment. The Scottish Greens wish Andy well in whatever he decides to do next." Broadband provider BT Openreach is to create 275 jobs in Scotland thanks to the Scottish Government's investment in superfast fibre optic broadband. The announcement means engineers will be deployed across the country to ensure people across Scotland can enjoy superfast internet connections in their homes and at work. It coincides with the Scottish Government's investment of £384 million into connecting Scotland's most rural areas to the network. Suspected Russian hackers accessed the systems of a US internet provider and a county government in Arizona as part of a sprawling cyber espionage campaign disclosed this week, according to an analysis of publicly available web records. The hack, which hijacked ubiquitous network management software made by SolarWinds to compromise a raft of US government agencies and was first reported by Reuters, is one of the biggest ever uncovered and has sent security teams around the world scrambling to contain the damage. The intrusions into networks at Cox Communications and the local government in Pima County, Arizona show that, alongside victims including the US Departments of Defense, State and Homeland Security, the hackers also spied on less high-profile organizations. SolarWinds, which disclosed its unwitting role at the center of that global hack earlier today, has said that up to 18,000 users of its Orion software downloaded a compromised update containing malicious code planted by the attackers. A wide-ranging analysis of the impact of coronavirus on Scotland's health, economy and society has been published. The report, published jointly by the Scottish Government and the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, confirms that people already suffering disadvantage are being hardest hit. The negative effects are far-reaching, but uncertainty remains over the long-term impact as the pandemic and responses to it continue to evolve. More positively, the report notes that the pandemic is speeding up the adoption of digital technologies, with the potential to improve business profitability and access to services such as healthcare, while the rise in home working could spread well-paid jobs more evenly across the country. The report also highlights increased community cohesion in many places, as well as rapid action to tackle homelessness during the pandemic. Health Secretary Jeane Freeman has confirmed that staff, visitors and patients at 3 hospitals will benefit from a further extension to free parking. Those parking at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary and Ninewells Hospital in Dundee will continue to be able to access the car parks free of charge until the end of March 2021. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Scottish Government has funded the car park providers, enabling them to lift charges at these PFI hospitals, with the initial 3-month suspension announced by Ms Freeman in March 2020. It was then extended until January 2021, with an agreement now in place until March 2021. And finally, a missing whale skull is the subject of a Police Scotland appeal for its return. The skull, belonging to a northern bottlenose whale and measuring 1 metre by 60 centimetres by 60, was left on Cockklawburn Beach near Berwick-upon-Tweed in October. However, inquiries have revealed that the skull was removed at some point between the 19th and 22nd of October. Prior to this, the 45-kilogram skull had travelled the length of Scotland after being removed from a beach near Cape Wrath. It is illegal to possess any part of a whale, dolphin or porpoise without being licensed. Any remains belonging to these species should not be removed from coastal areas. Northern bottlenose whales are a protected species and are rare visitors to Scottish waters. So that is all the headlines for today, but we are, as I said at the top of the show, here to talk about the Internal Market Bill. And before we get on to that, I should just mention, if you would like to join the conversation here, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland@7. As I said, we'll be talking all about the Internal Market Bill, so if you've got thoughts on that, then please do let us know by tweeting in there, and we'll be flashing some of those up throughout the show. But I want to come to Drew Hendry first, because Drew, this week you were suspended from the House of Commons. So for those who haven't maybe heard all the details of this, do you want to just tell us a wee bit about what happened?
Well, basically this internal market bill, which is a straightforward assault on devolution both in Scotland and in Wales, and has been condemned by academics, legal professionals, by a range of cross-party representatives, both in and out of different parliaments across the nations of the UK, was basically railroaded through with the provision for the UK government to overrule the wishes of the democratically elected Scottish Parliament. So it was important, I think, to do absolutely everything that we possibly could to stop this bill, and having used the parliamentary process at Westminster and seen that come to an end with the wishes of the Scottish people, who don't want a Tory government at Westminster to be making decisions over a range of Scottish issues, which cover things like controlling spending and economic development, infrastructure, cultural activities, education, water, power, gas, telecoms, railways, housing, health, justice, and much more. The Scottish people haven't elected the Tory government to make those decisions for them since 1951. So it was important not to let the bill go through without doing everything I could to stop it, and and to draw attention to the fact that this democratic outrage was going through Parliament. So at the end of the bill process, I protested its passage through the House of Commons.
Now, you were first of all told to kind of hold your wish and sit down, but then you removed the mace from the dispatch box. Now, a lot of people will not understand the purpose of that. So, what was that about?
Well, the Parliament can't sit and it can't legislate without the mace being in place. It's part of the traditions of Parliament. So it was, it was a final act to make the point, to obviously to draw attention to the injustice that was happening to our democratically elected Parliament in Scotland, and indeed the one in Wales, and to hamper the process of that bill. So I removed it, and I was suspended as a result, and I won't be able to go back to Parliament until January.
I see. So obviously then you won't be part of any approval of the deal that comes in. Is this just a fixed term then, or do you have to apologise or do anything else before you can be allowed back in?
Well, I certainly won't be apologising for doing the right thing by what I believe is the right thing by my constituents and indeed the people of Scotland. This is an assault on, as I say, in the democratically elected Scottish Parliament. The Scottish people go to vote to put this Parliament in place, and they elected people to legislate on their behalf on all these issues. The Scottish Parliament was overwhelmingly voted for in 1997, and when it was established in 1999, it's gone on to do, I think, on the whole, great work for the people of Scotland. And I think, as we saw in the social attitude survey that was out recently, only a tiny 7% of people in Scotland don't support the Scottish Parliament in some way or another. Obviously, there are many who want to see, now as we've seen from 17 polls in a row, many people want to go further now with that. But it is an institution that we have come to rely on and respect and want to legislate for us. So to have the Tories just overrule it in this way is just not acceptable.
Now, obviously, this kind of thing, the removing the mace and so on, is more symbolic than practical. It's not actually going to stop the bill being pushed through. So what do you think the impact of this protest is in terms of what it says to the public and what it says perhaps to the British government?
Well, I think, first of all, it says, it makes a point, and sometimes in politics, you've just got to say, look, there's a principled point to be made here, and people have to know what the effect of this bill. What I certainly couldn't say, and what we definitely wouldn't have wanted to see, was this bill going through with a whimper and people not being aware of the dangers that it holds. And that's why it was important to let people know. And if by making that protest that drew attention to the bill, which I believe it has, and more people now know about the dangers of the bill and what the Tory government are doing to the powers of the Scottish Parliament, then I think that's been a good thing to draw attention to that. And I believe I've been doing my job by my constituents and the people of Scotland by doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me turn to Ruth now. Ruth, what did you make of Drew's actions this week?
It's good to see somebody standing up for what they believe in. I was astonished to see that Labour sat on their hands when the SNP politicians that are there to provide a representation for the many thousands of people who vote for them. In Wales, where devolution in the Senedd is a very popular thing too, they have a Labour administration, a Labour government there. But Labour in Westminster abstained. They did nothing to protect the people of Wales who had voted Labour. So Keep Scotland the Brand is a party neutral campaign, and so I make my observations and choose my words carefully because my personal opinion is probably not a secret to many of folk here. But I think that one of the purposes of our elected representatives is to represent the views of the people that they have been elected by. And it is a really sad thing to see that those conservatives, the Scottish Conservatives, Scottish Lib Dem, the Scottish two Lib Dems, and Labour. Where are they? What are they doing for the people who voted for them? Because the vast majority of people across the political spectrum support Scotland's Parliament. They support Holyrood. The polling figures regularly say the Holyrood is a very, very popular form of government, and it's proportional representation. So in many ways, it's much, much more democratic than Westminster. And I mean, in some ways, I guess, speaking personally and not as a campaign representative, my only regret from what Drew did, that there wasn't a sort of rugby line out of the SNP waiting to catch them out so they could just do a runner with it, especially given that most of the gold and silver comes from Scotland. And to be honest, it just, I have got to the point where I truly believe, as a journalist who has watched democracy and politics for many years, I truly believe that we are actually at one of the most dangerous points for democracy in the United Kingdom. I truly fear that we are, and I don't say this lightly, I truly fear that we are stepping into the kind of drum beating that was I recognise from my reading of German history in 1933, I genuinely and sincerely say that with a heavy heart. I don't say it lightly in the slightest. Could be said flippantly. I'm not saying it flippantly. I genuinely believe that from watching all that is coming out of Westminster, we are watching our democracy decline. We are watching an increasingly authoritarian government. We are watching a government which is doing very sort of Bolsonaro style tactics and taking power closer to itself rather than distributing it back out, as we were promised that that our devolved parliament would be one of the most powerful in the world. And it just isn't happening. And I've watched the United Kingdom from abroad. I've watched the United Kingdom from developing countries. I've got family from a number of nations overseas who give me very honest feedback, and we are increasingly seen. Westminster is increasingly seen as a government which is saying goodbye to democracy. And I think that for Scotland's interests to have been better served by the House of Lords, the undemocratic House of Lords that has just seen, the first Lord of Siberia sworn in on account of the fact that his pals gave Tory funders a great big bung. For the undemocratic House of Lords to be better representing us than the Labour Party. What is the point of Labour anymore? It just, I despair. I despair at what the Conservative Party is doing, because I know many Conservatives up in Scotland, in my area, who do not feel that they are represented by that party anymore. And to be honest, my only regret, again speaking personally, is that Drew just didn't leg it with Mace.
Well, this has obviously made the news. It's enabled people to talk about the internal market bill. But there has been a lot of chatter that the media in Scotland haven't done a very good job of explaining to people what the internal market bill is and what it's going to do. What are your feelings on the way that the media has responded to this, given that in politics people regard it as a major crisis?
As you may well know, I am a journalist, and for many years I worked for the BBC and for other national broadcasters. And one of the reasons that I am so active within the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign is because I very quickly identified the fact that we were not being given the facts that were needed for us to function as a healthy democracy. In order for democracy to function, people need to vote and make informed choices. If you are not being given information and that information is not accurate and is not truly balanced with like for like in terms of experts rather than just opinionistas, then democracy is in trouble. This fits with my concern that democracy is in trouble because we are not being told. The public is not being told. We are not being given accurate information. So one of the things that I do through the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign is I present sourced information. So whether that be from Minute Batters, from the NFU, or when I put up the actual the document, including the evidence sessions from the Americans, and when they were coming up with their trade negotiation requirements. That's what's required. That's what is needed. The kind of incisive and accessible information is not being given. And there was an edict several months ago when Boris Johnson came into power a year ago that Brexit wasn't to be mentioned anymore. And I've seen sort of tortured messages from the civil service saying, well, actually, we want to tell people this, but we can't because we're not allowed to mention the B word. And I mean, for years, it has been known, for example, that radiotherapy might come to a shuddering halt in the first week of January, because as Dr. Philippa Whitford and others, and the Lancet and the British Medical Journal and many others for years have been trying to get across, technetium-33, it's got a half-life of 3 days, I think it is. And if it doesn't get to you in time, then it doesn't work. But my understanding is that the internal market bill and the deals going through Europe at the moment, or being, whether they're going through or not, if we leave Euratom, we stop being able, under the terms of international nuclear treaties, to access radiotherapy and radioisotopes. Now, that is critical. Where are we being told that? Where is that information? Dr. Philippa Whitford gets up and tries to make the point. The Lancet gets up and makes the point, and you get, the Boris Johnson and Rees-Mogg deriding them. Matt Hancock mocking professionals who are trying, their agenda is to tell people the truth so people can make informed choices. So I think that the media has been worse than supine. The media in many respects has been complicit. And you just have to look at the fact that in Scotland, I have friends who are still working in exactly the same jobs that they had when I left broadcasting 24 years ago. They're doing the same exact jobs because there aren't the opportunities. And I think that's a large part of the problem, is that if you don't think that you have an alternative option for employment, and you've got a mortgage to pay and kids to feed, well, often as not, you don't rock that boat. And the boat is being assailed on many levels. And I think that it's one of the reasons why I'm so pleased that Broadcasting Scotland and Independence Live Radio and other new broadcasters are coming up, because we have to find other ways of getting accurate and informed, sourced information out to the public.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ruth. It's always good to have your endorsement. But let me turn back to you, Drew. The bill, the internal market bill, is now going to pass. I mean, that's pretty much a done deal now. So is there any way that it can be stopped? For example, is a judicial review possible to challenge it against the Scotland Act, which says that this kind of thing won't be done without legislative consent?
Well, we know that the Welsh government are taking the UK government to court, and the Scottish government are going to be supporting them in that action. So there will be a legal challenge. The fact of the matter is that it shouldn't have to come down to last-ditch legal challenges to stop this kind of thing. And if I can just make one point on the media, don't forget that this bill was a Dominic Cummings baby, and they did a rather clever and sneaky thing by making it horrible in two ways. There was the assault on devolution, but of course the bit that took everybody's attention was the part about breaking international law, which they had to drop in the end. They probably knew they would have to drop that. And at the end, this bill has just been left with its naked attack on devolution. So I've got a tiny bit of sympathy for the media in terms of following that particular strand of it. But the fact of the matter is that this power grab has just not been picked up. It's not really been widely reported enough, and it's an extremely dangerous bill for people in Scotland and in Wales.
And so our viewers, we have been talking about this on Broadcasting Scotland for some time, but for any of our viewers who haven't heard much about it, what kind of damage can this bill do to Scotland, both in the short term and maybe in the longer term?
Well, it's almost unlimited. That's what makes it so particularly horrible and so worth protesting at every possible stage that we can. I mean, if you take, for example, the fact that in Scotland we have a publicly owned Scottish Water that is open to challenge under the terms of this bill in the internal market. The fact that just the sheer weighted numbers, the arithmetic means that if standards are dropped in England, or competition in England wants to challenge something in Scotland, they can override just about anything. Now, the main one that people will and should focus on, because it's not a myth, is food standards in the short term. We know that the Tories are desperate to do any trade deals they can to in some tiny measure mitigate some of the Brexit effects. So, if you look at any trade deal with, for example, the USA, the real present danger of getting chlorinated chicken on Scottish shelves is there, even though we would never have that. Hormone-injected beef. There's a whole range of different areas where this can affect what we do in public life in Scotland, from the Tories deciding that they want to build their bridge or their tunnel across the Irish Sea, as opposed to us spending infrastructure money on things that we believe are important here in Scotland. Roads, housing, health, justice, they can interfere across the board in decisions that are taken in Scotland, standards that are in Scotland, and of course our ability to differentiate between the other nations of the UK.
And Ruth, I'll come back to you on this, because obviously Keep Scotland, the brand, has been all about protecting the good reputation that Scottish produce has. So how are you feeling about this? And are some of the people that you work with, the farmers and so on, are they grasping what's going on?
I'm absolutely raging. I honestly, Kenny, I get up with a pulsating, fulminating ire every single day, and it doesn't go away. So the only thing that keeps me from going down and grabbing a mace and having a good smash at a few parliamentary doors is the fact that so many people in Scotland really care about this, and more they're standing up in different ways, and they're vocalizing, and even if they're not able to go out and do anything to make a difference, they're watching and they care. And so whether it be people making an effort to buy local, to support local Scottish produce, whether it is farmers watching with great nervousness what's happening to sheep. I mean, when George Eustace came out and made his comments about sheep farmers being able to diversify easily into beef, there was widespread astonishment. I think that there's an awful lot of people who have a particular political viewpoint which is not the same as mine, who always thought they'd be looked after by their friends, and to realise that their friends don't even understand what they're talking about, or worse still, don't care. I think that has come as a genuine and sincere shock. There are so many issues to do with food security, food standards, food justice, animal welfare. It's hard to know where to start. And that's one of the reasons why the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign focuses on the carrot. You know, we start off with a humble carrot because that's something which is in front of people. It's attainable. If you can pick up a carrot rather than a mace and run with it, that's something everybody can do. And I think that is one of the powerful things about a simple message delivered clearly. And I mean, up in Drew's neck of the woods, 96% of the houses have been leafleted with Keep Scotland the Brand leaflets that have been crowdfunded and delivered by volunteers in the area. That shows how many people care. And the reception that I have when I'm talking to farmers across the board, many of them couldn't believe it ever would happen, that what has happened with internal market bill. Many of them believe that it would never come to pass. But there were very, very few, I mean, seriously, very few, who wouldn't talk to me about it, and who they said, "Oh, I'll never come to that." But they're watching. So we'll see what that turns into. However, Minette Batters, who's somebody that I've always thought, she's got a bit of oomph about her. She's really taken it to the government in the last few weeks. So she's the president of the NFU in England and Wales, and I have to say that she's done a better job of taking the fight to Westminster than our NFU has, although they have been working, but I would suggest perhaps as timidly as some of the sheep on the hills. And but last week I saw an email was leaked from the NFU saying that they were quietly going to pursue DEFRA about reintroducing neonicotinoids, which are the pesticide which are extremely damaging to pollinators. I mean, almost certainly are the ones that are behind wiping out many of the bee populations that we have, including sort of single bees like bumbles and the like. Mm-hmm. This is huge. This is really significant. And so neonicotinoids have been removed from they're no longer, you can't use them anymore in the EU. What happens is that a seed. A seed is soaked in this material, and when that seed grows for the next 2 generations, that the flower, the fruit, the next generation of seeds, and the next generation into flower and fruit contains traces of this bee-killing pesticide. So people, we put it in our gardens, nice flowers, or we buy vegetables, and we'll think, oh, well, we'll keep the seed because we're being really holistic, and that's fantastic. And so you end up with 2 or 3 years of this poisoning pollinators, but you think you're doing the right thing. And these have been removed in an attempt to keep our pollinators, because quite frankly, if we don't have bees and pollinators, we don't have a lot of food. And then if you are sneaking about the place saying, oh, come on, let's get this back in because it's going to make life a bit easier for us. And things like that worry me very much, because that is one clear example of how the green revolution that people keep talking about is going to be undermined. And the internal market bill would mean that Scotland would not be able to keep parity with the EU, the whole thing about divergence and convergence. So for Scotland to be able to rejoin the European Union in future, it will be easier the more we converge, the more that our rules and regulations stay the same as European rules and regulations. If the more that we diverge, the harder it will be for us to have, keep our standards and just sort of step neatly back into the flock. But things like this are really serious, because this is the future of our environment. This is the climate. This is how you get the food in the plates. I was told that one of the biggest issues that soft fruit farmers have when they're growing in the grow bags and the polytunnels, if they grow food, if they put the raspberries, for example, if they put them into the ground, the pollinators will come. The biggest problem they have is if they're using grow bags, it's getting pollinators to come and pollinate that fruit. And that means that there's something, for all our cleverness, there's something that's lacking in the grow bag. So there's a lot that we don't understand about what pollinators recognize as being good and healthy. And there's a lot of, but if we're killing them as they're coming to pollinate our fruit, so that's just one example. And it's happening already. It's one example of what people are going to do. And the internal market bill would mean that we wouldn't even be able to protect the bees buzzing about our hedgerows.
Now, Drew, as Ruth said there, obviously Scotland wants to try and stay within EU regulations to potentially ease readmission to the EU after independence, if that should happen sometime soon. So how much of the damage that can be done through the internal market bill would be potentially irreversible? Oh, have we lost Drew? I think we've lost Drew for a moment. So Ruth,
I can answer that question for you.
Yeah,
Kenny.
yeah, I'll come back to you. Sorry, no, I think we've got Drew back now. We've got Drew back now. So Drew, I don't know if you caught that question. I was just saying
that indeed.
Ruth was saying how obviously Scotland, with an eye on independence, wants to try and remain in convergence with EU regulations. How much damage could things like the internal market bill do to Scotland's frameworks? When it comes to that, would it make it? How much more difficult will it make it for Scotland to re-enter the EU?
Well, I think we do have a danger there. We have to be aware of that, and obviously, one of the reasons for wanting to stop this happening is to protect what we already have in Scotland and make sure that we are in a position where we can maintain those high standards. I believe the opportunity is there for us in May to take our view on independence to the Scottish parliamentary elections, and then to vote as soon as possible after that. I think if we can do that relatively quickly, then we should be able to avoid most of the damage. But let's be clear, it is a clear and present danger. The UK's chief trade negotiator, the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott has actually come out already and said, this is the guy who was appointed as a part of the democracy. He got a call from Liz Truss saying they want to do this, and got the job. He's already said that most British farmers are high quality providers, and that will change over time. They're stating this policy that it will be a race to the bottom in terms of standards. So it is something we have to be very aware about. And I think when people are thinking about how they vote for the future, as many more people are obviously doing from these 17 polls in a row, they will see that the only way to protect standards and to make sure we've got the opportunity of the kind of Scotland we want into the future, which is one with high standards and fair practices and treats people in a fair way, is to vote to become a normal independent country and take our place and a seat on an equal basis within the EU.
Mm-hmm. And Ruth, you almost came in there. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I was living in Australia when Tony Abbott became Prime Minister, and I have kept an eye on things with the politics of Australia ever since. And Tony Abbott's loss was quite rapid and not met with significant regret. He was not considered to be a friend of the farmer in Australia. He was not considered to have been a friend of many in Australia, really. But that's why he didn't last very long. And I think the thing is that Scotland trades on our reputation. We'll never do the whole stack 'em high, sell 'em low, cheap as chips and just sort of churn it out. And we don't want to do that because that means animals, at the end of the day, that means animal suffering. So as a vegetarian, I campaign for Scottish meat, the Scottish meat industry, because I think if people are going to eat meat, they should eat meat which is farmed as humanely as possible. And I've lived and worked in enough agricultural areas in Scotland to know that actually it does make a difference if an animal is kept in its peer group. It does make a difference if an animal is killed locally. And the slaughterhouse in Kirkwall in Orkney, which is now gone unfortunately, it was one of the best. I've been in there. It was a tremendous place, and it was staffed. It was stuffed with humanity. Now, a good reputation, which, by the way, while you're at it, Fergus Ewing, if you're watching, let's get our finger out about mobile abattoirs, because we need to get this going so that we can actually keep the local meat sector going. We can add value to smallholders and crofters in outlying areas, and we can do a whole lot for animal welfare while we're at it. So mobile abattoirs now, please. But a reputation hard won, as Scotland's is on the international market, is easily lost. And once it's lost, it's hard to get it back. And one of the huge issues that we face is not only having our industry undermined and eviscerated, and a second clearance is happening, because make no mistake, if people can't get their food to market, if people can't make a living, then they will stop making a living from the land. And then the land comes up for sale, and who gets it? The carpetbaggers get it. And I'm already hearing about big landowners, and of course some of them are quite litigious, so I'm not going to mention them, but we all know who they are, who are selling the land to their tenant farmers in the sure and certain knowledge that in a couple of years they're going to be buying it back at cheap rates when those tenant farmers have gone bust. And so I think that in Scotland, one of the reasons why I'm so keen on Mari Gudjon and Fergus Ewing getting the mobile abattoir situation sorted out is so that we actually have a healthy local market. We've got the farm to fork connection. We've got the 20-minute neighbourhoods happening. And if you have got areas where people can raise their crops, raise their livestock, slaughter them locally, then you're going to get situations where you've got families staying because they can get the added value on their storing away black pudding, which is at risk. That's one of the other things that I've been banging on about for years, and people really do understand that our PGI, the loss of our PGI and those names, that is another huge issue that the Internal Market Bill can just wipe out. It can wipe out our quality, and if we're having to rely on the shysters, Liz Truss to stand up for Scottish farmers and Japanese trade deals and others, she doesn't even explain properly what a rollover trade deal is. Everybody is going, oh, this is fantastic, we've got these rollover trade deals. They are actually really not worth that much, because a lot of them rely on the final trade deal with the EU because of the whole quota issue, because they've already got a trade deal with the EU. So So everybody's going, oh, this is fantastic, we've got these deals. It really isn't. It really isn't. Honestly, if you think things are bad now, just wait until the 5th of January.
Now, you did mention there the trade deal between the EU and the UK, which at the moment, as we said when we were going through the headlines earlier, is perhaps going to happen, perhaps not going to happen. We really don't know at this stage, with really not much time left to make any sort of deal. So, Drew, let me come to you. Are you expecting any sort of deal to be agreed in the next few days?
Well, I think it's either going to be no deal or some really horrible low deal. I think that's just a matter of course now, and we're destined to get disruption and some big problems either way. I think at the moment the fact that we're at the 11th hour of the final kind of last 2 weeks of this entire process after 4 years is astonishing, and it's just been driven by Tory dogma, pandering to the Brexiteers, the hard Brexiteers, and all of us are paying the price. And when you look at the situation that we're so close to the precipice now, when Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU and not to have these things forced upon us, it really is a double disgrace. And as I said earlier, and I'm going to repeat it as often as I can, people are more and more seeing that as a matter of fact, and that's why the opinion polls supporting independence are now consistently showing that it's the settled view of the Scottish public that we need to get out of this Westminster setup and take control of our own affairs.
Mm-hmm. And given the way that the UK government has behaved towards Scotland throughout this Brexit process, not listening to the Scottish government's representations on how Scotland might be able to get a differentiated deal, overriding the Scotland Act previously, and by claiming it wasn't normal times, and now this issue which you faced this week over the internal market bill. How confident are you that come next year, assuming that there is a big SNP win in the Holyrood election, that a referendum process can be agreed in relatively short order?
Well, I think it's undeniable, that if we're able to maintain the support for independence it's now showing and grow that, when the elections come round in May and we're able to reflect that there again. We already see the Tory ministers in the Parliament conceding that there will be another vote. The Defence Secretary just the other week said when the Scottish people vote, he thinks they'll vote to remain in the Union. So that was a big part of their mask falling. They know that this is undeniable. They know that the world is watching, and I believe that we have the momentum now. It's important that we don't take anything for granted, but we work through this together. We don't allow ourselves to become split. We stay together as one and focused on that prize, and that the people will in Scotland demand that we have a vote. And I'm very confident that will happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ruth, let me come to you, and pretty much the same questions. Are you expecting a deal to emerge from this, the EU-UK negotiations sometime soon?
I'm not sure. I spend more time than is healthy watching trade talk Twitter, and it even nobody's kind of nailing their colours to the mast and saying, it's going to happen, or no, it's not. There's the whole, well, it could be one of those famous EU sort of a long dark night on Sunday that'll finally sort things out, or maybe it won't, because one of the problems is that the UK has acted in such bad faith that the sort of the shake of the hand and the nod of the head that would be perhaps the norm with a trade deal is having to be nailed down very specifically. And I think that is one of the problems. And of course, everything still has to go then to the European Parliament for parliamentarians to vote upon it. So It's not over yet. And actually, even if it is over, even if we do get a deal, Brexit hasn't happened in its fullness. And I don't think that people really understand that it's not going to be business as usual. The last time I checked was of the 4,000 hauliers that were going to be given licenses to drive onto the continent of Europe, taking Scottish goods, of UK-wide goods for export, only I think there's 40,000 journeys a week, if I'm correct. I may not be. I think it's 40,000 journeys, so 4,000 lorries. Not one of those are from Scotland. Not one Scottish haulier, the last time I was able to find those figures, had been given a licence. One of our hauliers in Scotland is a Lloyd's listed company, one of the biggest transporters of Scottish goods, and they haven't been given a licence. Now, what does that do to our exports? And if you've been watching the news and seeing the long queues in Kent, it's not, I'm hearing more and more stories of people going, you know what, we're just not going to bother exporting. And when they do export from the EU to the UK, they're getting an extra a delivery charge being dropped on them. So this is just the start. This is just a start. When I was horrified to watch David Duguid, a farmer's son from Aberdeenshire, David Duguid sitting, well, people will get, they'll be able to get pasta. They may not just be able to get the shape of pasta they want, or maybe spaghetti hoops, and I'm looking at him thinking, you're talking about people's lives. You're talking about food on our plate. You're talking about food security. And I've been watching supermarkets warning about this for years. I've been speaking to people whose jobs it is to make sure there's food in our schools and our hospitals, people whose jobs it is to make sure there's food on the supermarket shelves. There's people who are genuinely alarmed. When the Police Federation a couple of years ago wrote an open letter warning about why they would need extra funding because of reciprocal agreements, they'd been told they'd have to give a hand to, for example, English police. One of the things that they were talking about in that open letter was food riots, having to go down and control food riots. They're talking about having to put extra police to patrol food deliveries. They're talking about cattle rustling, sheep rustling. They're worried about having police farms that are getting their entire crops stripped because we're not going to have enough fruit and veg. There's 40% of our fruit and veg in the winter. It's 60% of our fruit and veg comes from overseas. And if you're talking about going back, and I've actually had people telling me at some of the farmers' markets, it's no problem, we'll just go back to mutton and kale. Well, that's fine, but I remember those days. I'm old enough to remember life that was basically involved mashed meat and tatties in the winter. And I remember the first time I ever saw a red pepper. It was in an art class, and I was like, I went to trouble because I was eating the display because I'd never had one before. But that's how old I am. That's not that long ago. So, but all of this, it just drives me mad to think that people are going, it'll be fine if we get a deal. It's not going to be fine if we get a deal. It's just going to be like, are you jumping out a burning building on the 28th floor or the 10th floor? That's kind of what we're looking at.
And perhaps to end on a slightly more optimistic note, how optimistic are you about the process towards independence, about the negotiations to have a referendum and then whether it can be won?
Well,
I think it's. Sorry, on you go.
Sorry.
I've been at a couple of in my personal capacity, from my own personal point of view, because obviously the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign is politically neutral, but I am not. So I've been at a couple of Women for Independence meetings. The first where Joanna Cherry was talking, and the second where the First Minister was talking, and they both said that yes, the gold-plated standard is a Section 30 referendum. However, in order to fulfil the international sort of scrutiny and obligations on a nation when it becomes independent, you have to have a verified democratic event. And so if it became obvious that a Section 30 order wasn't going to come into being, which would of course be the ideal, as long as there's a democratic event, and a parliamentary election would count as a democratic event, then that would be okay. And actually, listening to lots of folk within the nerdosphere who know such things, the UK, Westminster has acted in such bad faith. The behaviour, in particular, around the proroguing of Parliament, the illegal proroguing of Parliament, the illegality and preparedness to break international law and international treaty over the Internal Market Bill. The world is watching, and the world knows what it is looking at, and there are precedents across Europe and in other parts of the world where nations have taken independence without a gold-plated Section 30 order. So it is. I am convinced that if the majority of the Scottish people vote for it, then it will indeed come. And I have to say, I've never been a member of a political party in my life before. I actually was a very floating voter. There's one party I've never voted for, but the rest I've been pretty flexible with, depending on who the constituency MPs or MSPs have been. And 3 days after the Brexit vote, I joined the SNP because we moved back from Australia in 2015 so that my children could enjoy freedom of movement around Europe. And I have to say that I have spent every day since the Brexit vote in 2016 putting my professional talents and efforts into working for independence. So I truly hope the Scottish people will deliver the goods, and I think that they will.
Mm. Well, that does seem like a fairly good place to end. So I would like to thank very much Drew Hendry MP and Ruth Watson for joining us. It's been a great hour to talk. Obviously, not the most cheerful topic, but hopefully we did end on some sort of optimism at the end there. But that is all we have time for this evening. So we'd like to thank you very much for joining us as well. As always, we do have to ask, if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register if you'd like to sign up as a regular supporter. Your £5 a month makes a big difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. And as many of our regular viewers will know, we have been running a crowdfunder as well. We are hoping to raise enough to start employing a full-time editor and hopefully some journalists as well. We really want to ramp up the kind of coverage that we can provide, especially going into next year's election and potentially a referendum as well. So you can also make a one-off donation there by going to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely understand. The shows will always be free to view online, but do please follow us on social media. You can get us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. You can like our Facebook page. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on the Amazon Fire Stick, and then please do share these shows around with your friends and family. Let them know what Broadcasting Scotland is, what we do, and why you think they should give us a try. Word of mouth is by far the best way to spread the word about what we do here. And finally, as I said, we are looking to employ some staff, but we also need volunteers all over the country, particularly when it comes to covering that election. We really want to have people at all the counts all over the country. So if you're interested in getting involved there, you don't need any experience, although if you have experience, you're very welcome. We can provide training and help and whatever. So if you're interested at all in getting involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, wherever you are in Scotland, we would love to hear from you. That is absolutely all we have time for this evening, though. I will be back on Sunday, where we're going to be talking to Dr. Philippa Whitford and presumably one other guest, although that's not been confirmed yet. Sorry? Oh, I've just got in my ear. We'll also have Anthony Salamone from European Merchants, one of Scotland's leading experts on our relationship with the EU. So should be a fascinating discussion with both of them. So that's on Sunday at noon, and then Gordon will be back for Scotland at 7 on Monday. But until then, thanks for joining us and have a great weekend. Good night.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.